Welcome to the American Intelligence Media. I am your host, Thomas Paine in the Ass of the Globalist, Douglas Gabriel, and I have my guest, the top guest.
You sure are.
Yes, I am. Every day I seem to cause them more problems. It's like that, thorn in the side thing that just won't go away. I have Michael McKibben with me, and he has come with another bombshell. This bombshell is so huge that the whole conclave had to put their cheesecake down and get to work this morning to try to figure out what we could say, because it was so shocking what he brought to us. And by the way, we'll start this off with may there be peace on the Korean Peninsula. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
You have been, again, digging up amazing things, and I don't even know where to start. So all I can say is, can you please fill us in on what you have been finding?
Well, I can think of an analogy. When you catch one of your children having dipped into the cookie jar and they've still got some chocolate on their mouth, that's what we have just discovered. Several of our researchers just discovered some unbelievable information that does fill in more pieces of this puzzle of how the deep state is funding itself, and in this case, what they were likely doing before, during, and after the Facebook initial public offering in May of 2012.
And it goes back to the same place that you left off with your research, the Privy Council of the British Crown, and some of the same exact people being involved in groups that paraded as a charity, but in fact, through Serco, which we've talked about so much, gathered up the IP, gathered up the patents of America, took them to Britain, stole some of them, and certainly did insider trading on the big ones that were going to then be released as IPOs and go public on the stock market. They knew ahead of time. And it sounds like you have found the ultimate group that did that, particularly in relationship to the fractionalization of this of the stock.
The fractionalization of private shares that they did with Facebook before the initial public offering.
In this group,
it really goes back to the reorganization of the Intellectual Property Institute in London, in the assignment of 5 British knights. Actually, one had not been knighted yet, but the other 4 had been knighted. And the march of those people through the 1990s into the 2000s, and their participation in the flow of funds around the planet, and it's actually a small group of people, and they all seem to have "Sir" in front of their names now.
And they have coordinators on the Privy Council. I was so shocked recently in studying the Privy Council of the British monarchy that people like this person you've revealed, David A. Walker, was in charge of the Bank of England at one point, but he's also doing all kinds of underhanded theft of patents from America, messing around with Serco, which has fantastic contracts with America that just sucks money out of America like an unbelievable amount each year, and has been involved with fraud and has been involved with actually giving quite poor services. And Sir Geoffrey Patty, who we've talked about, who's also on the Privy Council, and others on that Privy Council, Judge Stewart, who, if there's any problems with what this, I call it really a corporate intelligence group, this Privy Council of the Queen, if they have any problems, they can just take another Privy Council member who runs a separate court called the Queen's Court or the King's Court, depending on whether there's a king or queen at the time, and they basically can wave a magic judicial wand and can get the Queen out of anything. And people need to remember
that appears to be the game. This is how the ultimate corrupt people manage their liability, is they always have judges involved in their treachery, so that if their normal ways of hiding their activity fail, they always have the backup of having that judge be able to get them out of trouble. And I'm recalling of Chief Justice John Roberts in Obamacare as an example in the U.S.
It's a perfect example. In other words, you can't prosecute the Queen. You can't even ask about the Queen. So if the Queen's money, which she's considered to be the richest person on the earth, if her money is in the Bank of England, and of course in many of her other Commonwealth offshore accounts, but if it's in the Bank of England, we were always told in the conspiracy theories that, of course, it was the Rothschilds who provided the money to begin with to create fiat currency through the central bank of the Bank of England. So you always were told, well, then it's, at this point, Sir Evelyn de Rothschild, who would then be controlling the Queen's money. No, you seem to have found the amazing links together to show how it really works. And it looks as if this David A. Walker, who is in fact in charge of the Bank
Sir
of England,
David A. Come on, get it right.
Sorry. I'm in America and I don't do metric system. And I don't bow to monarchs, as a matter of fact. I don't bow to anyone. I'm an American. But anyway, so what we find is this system is really, really nice and tight. And just like you said, it's really only a small group of people, but they have the ultimate power, the ultimate authority, whether it's in court, whether it's in the Bank of England, whether it's with resources, whether it's with Serco contracts.
Well, let me just read you this amazing resume about Sir David Walker. Let me just read you right from when he left school. He worked at the International Monetary Fund in Washington. Then he went back.
That was his first job?
That was his first job.
To go to the most corrupt place for economics in the world?
And he went to Washington to do it.
Quite a placement.
As sort of an internship. They called it a secondment. I'd never heard of that term, but basically it's an internship. And then he went from there to Her Majesty's Treasury, where he was Assistant Secretary, to the Permanent Secretary. Then he went to the Bank of England, where he was Chief of Economic Intelligence, and then later a Director. Then he went to the Central Electricity Board, and then he was head of one of the steering committees of the London Stock Exchange, and then went back to the Electricity Board, and then he was a council of Lloyd's as a mayor. Then he went to the Securities and Investment Board in the management, and then became chairman of that. Then he became a member of the court of the Bank of England. And then sometime during that time, he got a master's in economics, I think, at Queen's College in Cambridge. Then he was executive director of the Bank of England for 6 years. And then he became a knight. Then from there, he became the deputy chairman of Lloyd's, and then he joined the Group of 30 in Washington, D.C., where he was the treasurer, member, and a trustee. And then I never heard of this group, he was a director in the British Invisibles. And it has another name, it's two other names, International Financial Services London and also the City, UK. Then he went, and I'm skipping a couple of them, he became the chairman of Morgan Stanley, various groups of Morgan Stanley. Then he was a director of Reuters Venture Capital. Then he went back to Morgan Stanley as chairman. Then he was chairman of Dean Witter. And then, get this, and he may still be a director of a Russian venture capital company called RVC, which is Russian Venture Capital Company, that's associated, by the way, with our friends at Rosatom and Skokolova and the John Podesta crowd in Boston. Then he was chairman of the London Investment Bankers Association, was the vice chairman of Legal and General Assurance, went back as senior advisor to Morgan Stanley. He was on the committee that investigated the British aerospace corruption scandal. Then he became chairman of Barclays Bank in 2012, and now he's with Winton Capital, which is 10% owned by Goldman Sachs. And now he is the chairman of Settle, SETL, which is working on blockchain technology. And he, in 2016, was appointed to the Institute of Business Ethics. So there you go. It's quite a guy.
Now, was he appointed to the Privy Council?
No, he's a knight.
There's probably a rule that says you can't run the Bank of England and also be in the Privy Council, seeing that the collusion would be amazing. But what I want to know is, do you think that the knighthood, the Sir thing, that is basically given to anybody who helps protect the Queen's golden shares?
It's kind of the lowest rung of the totem pole in many ways of all those types of positions, and I imagine they all feel the responsibility to protect the golden shares. That would be my read of their position.
Now,
They certainly take an oath of fealty to the Queen.
oh, I read the oath. It was amazing. Amazing. You can't, in the oath it says you can't even ask a question or even have a forbearance, anything but forbearance for anything that comes from the monarch. These Knights of the Queen, would it be indignant for me to call them the Queen's men?
Well, yeah. I mean, you don't become a knight unless you've done something significant, usually in some field of endeavor. And for these people in business, they've in this case with Sir David, he's her banker. It's real clear he's her banker.
So the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, they were knighted. One of
Right.
Sir John and Sir Mick.
Yeah, the music world. I mean, she knights people in a lot of different enterprises.
Okay,
types of
so
enterprises.
then what do you got to be really up there, you know? But Sir Geoffrey Patty, he's a knight, and so I have great respect for the power of evil that he holds in his hands. So do they get the Order of the Garter and the OBE and all these other orders? Do you think those are because they do favors for the monarchy?
Well, yeah, all of them. It seems that all of them are there to take care of the Queen's business in various different ways. I mean, they're supposed to be they're supposed to be honorary and to recognize some great achievement, and I'm sure that's the case with some of them. But in this case, this guy's obviously the Queen's banker.
Well, I like the three words out of his curricula vitae there: economic intelligence.
Right.
I would call that economic terrorism, and the Invisibles. You know, why would you name yourself that unless you were doing something dirty in the dark? And remember, these sirs are all knights. They probably do a lot of their dirty work at night. I'm telling you, this is, to me, every time I dig deeper and from the research that you give us, and I look at this stuff, at one point I'm reading along and I just burst out laughing because it says, well, if this doesn't happen and this doesn't happen, and if this bill doesn't happen, and, you know, of course, that's pending the Queen's approval. I mean, more or less. So the Queen has this veto power, this golden share. And now we found that it even went into the theft of U.S. patents like Leader Technologies' patent for scalable social networking that the IBM Eclipse Group. We think that there had to have been some kind of connection there directly in that group, and now we found it. David Kapos was working for Serco, and of course all these knights, let's just call them the knights if I can't use derogatory terms, all those knights, the Queen's knights, they're all getting a piece of the pie. As a matter of fact, they're getting a piece of the pie before the pie's even cut up. It goes to England for them to steal it before we Americans get to look at it. This is, and also you've pointed out, the amazing trail of evidence showing the manipulation of these corporations in England that show the way shill companies are created. 20 companies are created at once so that when one goes bankrupt, another one can hide the funds, or they can take the losses from one, and they can. And so now you've developed this picture of a group called MBNK Investments PLC, which David A. Walker, former head of the Bank of England and basically the head of everything in Britain and the United Kingdom. I mean, your list of his resume was basically what the person who holds the power of the Bank of England would have as their subsidiaries. And so,
well, we found most of his resume is quite easy to find. The problem with his resume, just like Sir Geoffrey's, is it's rather fragmented. So you learn about this position there, and you learn about another position somewhere else, but nowhere do you see a complete, thorough resume. And our people were compiling the spreadsheet. It became a spreadsheet. It was so long, and I believe Betsy's going to publish it, or it will be published soon. But we were putting the final touches on that draft, and then somebody did a search and found that Bloomberg had issued a resume of his, And we looked at it, and on the surface it looked like all the other Bloomberg executive resumes until we started reading it. And then we read it, and it said Sir Richard A. not Sir David A. Walker, and then it started out to describe him, and then it went off into somebody else's resume. And then it went down about, let me count how many pages. It was a very long resume. And yeah, it went down a couple lines describing another guy, and then another 5 or 6 lines describing Sir David, and another 15 lines describing this other guy, and then another. It just went back and forth. It was 2 different David Walkers were described in the same disclosure for Sir David A. Walker. So whenever you see this stuff in formal documents, you know something fishy's up. So we had somebody who started digging into the details and actually highlighting, which I believe Betsy's going to post, the 2 different resumes all the way down through this. And in the midst of reading that, we saw a reference to a company we had not seen in all the other resumes called this NBNK Investments PLC, which Sir David was involved in, and never heard of it. Went to the company's house at the in London, the official corporate records office, and we looked up this particular company, which I'm going to find the company number because anybody can look this up. So go to Company's House and look up the register number 7303316. It's NBNK Investments PLC. And we saw this company we hadn't heard of that had this massive record that started in 2010 and sold in 2013 and folded in 2016. And while it's not unusual for those kinds of things to occur, what was unusual was the players involved. And when we looked at the players involved, then it started getting interesting because we saw that the investors in this company, first of all, the board of directors was royalty and included one of the governors of the Intellectual Property Institute was Sir Geoffrey from 1994, and he's in this company, and that's how we found it. So we started going through the records in this company and discovered that the investors in this company, I'm going down to find that list of investors, are Invesco Asset Management, Aviva Investors Global Services, Bailey Gifford and Company, which is basically Vanguard, Zif Management, F&C Asset Management, Moore Capital Management, BlackRock Investment Management, J.P. Morgan Asset Management, and Syncos Channel Islands. And so this was a hefty group of investors, and we now know from the records that they together put in about 40 million pounds, which is like $80 million into this company, and their stated aim was to find a company to invest in to start a new retail bank in England. And so we started going down through the years that they reported, and Sir Richard, I'm sorry, we keep getting this Walker's mixed up. Sir David Walker was the chairman of the remuneration committee, and collectively these sirs paid each other about £1.5 million in fees for being a director of this company, although it had no operation except to find another bank to buy. So we marched down through 2012. They reappoint themselves as directors in the mid-2012. This would have been right after the Facebook initial public offering at the end of May. In June, they appoint them all as directors, and then we see an unusual thing happen. We see the company decide, well, we can't really find a suitable company to buy, so we are going to shut down. So they actually voted to do a voluntary liquidation. And then a new director offered to put in about 40 million pounds and take over the company, and that's when it got interesting.
And as you have pointed out already, the fractional investment is the key. And as you have pointed out in previous talks with us, all of the people involved in the IBM Eclipse Foundation group knew with insider trading information that you were about to complete the patent, the content, the source code, the intellectual property, copyrights, all that was necessary to move into scalability of social networking. And they were waiting for that. And so you can see this company just sat there doing nothing, looking for a retail bank. They couldn't find a retail bank. They got $80 million. They can't find
Right.
a place
We're talking
to do
about
a bank.
some of the most successful players in banking on the planet. They couldn't find a company to buy. That's obviously a ruse.
Now, what we know is, because we've followed this routine so many times, and Leader Technology was the worst, gross, most egregious example of this type of IP patent manipulation by a core of people working with Serco through David Kapos, who was the head of the patent office, who had been with IBM. They're sitting around waiting for you to complete what you are creating here, and this group was set up. And just like the other venture capitalists, just like Eric Schmidt, who rolled in with $400 million, just like all these people who invested in what companies? That would be Google, Facebook, Twitter, that would be Gmail, that would be PayPal, that would be all of the biggest companies, tech companies in America, all burst at one time because they got the rest of the code. And when they got it, this group, it seems, could have, through their language of the way they were constituted themselves, could have been doing this fractional investing, and then turned around, and when it went from being private and they invested, and as you have pointed out, so many of these companies had huge investments before they became public and got an IPO, went onto the stock market. And then when they did, as you pointed out, Facebook had a special exemption to allow this type of fractional investment before they became an IPO, even from foreign countries, which is unusual. And then they got a special exemption that as soon as they went public, these investors could sell off their stock. And what do you think $80 million turned into in that when Facebook became an IPO, Michael?
Well, Facebook went out at $100 billion valuation.
So they went from millions to billions? Is that what you're saying? Are you saying every one of these NK Investment PLC people with their $80 million investment turned around and could have brought home billions and billions and billions?
Well, what it doesn't appear that this company as such invested in anything except paid themselves £1.5 million in salary. But what is more interesting are the investors in this deal. These investors are some of the biggest banks and brokers on the planet. And it appears that they used this NBNK potential bank as a mechanism to facilitate the flow of the investing that was going on in Facebook prior to the IPO in 2012. So Facebook started selling fractional shares, in other words, shares to insiders, shares of insider stock to the market through Goldman Sachs and others. And a fractional share is, so if there's one insider share of Facebook, Goldman may have taken it and fractionalized it into 1 million shares and then sold those 1 million shares in a sub-market. This is the mechanism they use to raise billions of dollars to pump Facebook's valuation up to $100 billion before the IPO. So this organization, call me crazy, but I think this is the organization, MBNK, that facilitated all that flow of cash to Facebook and then out of Facebook after the IPO. It certainly appears that way because otherwise there's no reason for this organization to exist. They didn't do anything, and they say very lamely that they couldn't find a bank that was suitable for them to buy. Come on, we're talking about the biggest bankers on the planet.
And a company that was created as a shill and then had the cover of going around talking to investors about opening a new bank when in fact they were spreading insider knowledge about what those investors should invest in.
It it appears that because they're all investors, there's a specific securities rule that if you're selling stock for another person, you have to register as a securities dealer, and there's certain disclosure requirements you have, and but none of those rules apply if you're an insider, if you're an investor in the company that you're raising money for. So what it appears here is that all the big players on the planet who were facilitating this sale of Facebook fractional shares were all being facilitated through this NBNK. It has no activity other than what these insiders were likely doing on their own in their own companies to remove that stock around, so they could kind of a double-blind sale, so you couldn't really show who was investing in Facebook. And of course, at the time, everybody smelled a rat, but nobody did anything. And as we now know, the head of the SEC at the time, Shapiro, she had invested in over 40 of these funds that were holding stock in Facebook when it went public. So she stood to gain more than anybody. So our regulatory environment was in on this game. So they didn't raise their voice at all.
So NBNK Investment PLC, to me, is an obvious shill, just simply because of the people who are on that committee. And in a minute, we're going to give you the blockbusting news of who joined that committee to take advantage of these benefits, which were so hidden that one of the members had been in a group called Invisible. But one member, Sir Geoffrey Patty, is on the Privy Council, and he controls the Queen's golden shares. Now, I'm sorry to be rude, but I believe that the Privy Council made sure that the Queen got her part of Facebook too. And all investments, because anything coming out of the stolen IP, the stolen patents from America by Serco, which come to England and get their first classification in England, believe that or not, our inventions have to go to England, and they get to classify them, and if they want, they can practically throw them away and then say, oh, no, it's nothing. We're not going to give you a patent. We're not even going to consider it. You're not even going to go on the list. So this group, which we know has been crooked in every other group that you have found them in, and showing that they have always insider trading, always preferential treatment, and always preferential treatment given by these very powerful members of the Privy Council to the monarchy of Britain, which then, of course, and this is where it gets sticky,
it would have been very simple
Bank of England.
It would have been very simple for these insiders in this company to purchase shares on behalf of the Privy Council or the Queen, and it'll never show up on the books.
That's what I was trying to say. These people know how to work the system.
Right.
As I said to you when you found out that Strategic Communications Laboratories, that I thought the company had gone bankrupt, you said, no. One of their many companies has gone bankrupt.
Right.
Who cares? They'll roll that debt into another one of their companies and actually use it to make money. I mean, when it comes down to it.
Well, the bottom line is crooked lawyers know how to hide anything.
Precisely. And they can hide these numbers beautifully, also, the way that these numbers work, because nobody gets to look at the numbers at the Bank of England. Now, the Bank of England is a central bank, and all but 3 countries right now have a central bank. Now, there's lots of myths that say all central banks are owned by Rothschilds. That's not true. There are many central banks that are owned by the nation themselves, but there are many nation central banks that the initial investment came from Rothschild investment companies or Rothschild banks. So when you look at the control, almost every major sovereign nation has a central bank, and they all queue off of the British Central Bank, the Bank of England, and membership in the International Monetary Fund. And that's what so much is about. So let's look at the 3. There's 3. There's Cuba, Iran, and North Korea that do not yet have any type of central bank. Isn't that funny? What an interesting list of countries and the conflicts that are going on there. So people will say this is a myth. No. You go look it up on Wikipedia. All these countries have central banks. Some are controlled and owned directly outright by the Rothschild family, and some are the initial loan, like in Libya, the initial loan came from a Rothschild bank. So that's happening all over the world. And wherever there's conflict, right after the conflict, a central bank is opened so that they can get loans from the International Monetary Fund and create a debt just like central banks always do. The Rothschilds gave the hard currency to create British fiat paper currency and fake currency that isn't real silver and gold. So that continues with the U.S. Federal Reserve. That continues with every central bank. And what we have to look at is you can't look at England's Bank of England. You can't. You're not allowed to. As a matter of fact, until you showed these connections, I don't think anyone that I've ever seen has put in writing the way that it really works. And this is the way that it really works. It's a preferential treatment for a monarchy who you cannot question anything they do economically, and who has insider trading information not only from the Knights of Malta and from the Vatican Bank and from the IMF and the World Bank and all the insider trading information that comes to those group of knights who serve the Queen and the Privy Council and the British and the United Kingdom. But specifically, we're talking about a person who then can take the wealth that she has and just create more wealth nonstop. Because when you have insider trading like this, knowledge.
This system makes George Soros look like a piker.
Or Martha Stewart look like nothing. Exactly. So thank you for discovering this. Now, here's the big bombshell. Tell them who took Sir David A. Walker's place in NBNK Investment PLC.
Wilbur Ross put 20 million pounds and took over the company, became chairman. The current Commerce Secretary.
Do you find
he
that
actually
slightly suspicious?
He paid off David Walker's. He bought his stock back, and David Walker installed a new CEO from Barclays, where he was chairman, and therefore continued with his man inside while Wilbur Ross was running the company.
But Wilbur Ross invested that money in a company that supposedly had a big chunk of money and did nothing with it except pay the members of that company. But
Right.
He would pay $40 million to become the CEO of it for 2 years and then just let the whole thing dissolve, and all he would get is his portion.
They got paid back, and so they got most of their money back except for the salaries. So it's obviously one big bribery scheme to pay your people plenty of salary. This was clearly a shell to handle transactions off the books. And I need to mention that the Sir David Walker's colleague on the Intellectual Property Institute was a man by the name of Sir Alfred Shepard, who was actually knighted at the same time as Sir Evelyn Robert Adrian de Rothschild. So there we have a direct connection between the Intellectual Property Institute, this NBNK, Sir Geoffrey, Sir David, and the Rothschilds. This is all judicially recognizable evidence.
And Wilbur Ross started his career as a leverage buyout agent, asset management for N.M. Rothschild, New York.
Was that right?
He started with the Rothschilds. He actually helped Trump at one point with his bankruptcy by allowing some asset management ideas to play into the deal so that Trump got to keep some buildings instead of go bankrupt and, readjust the credit and so on and so forth. So he is a genius who worked for Rothschild, and he has basically been the biggest leverage buyout guy in America. And he has swept in and bought out the coal industry, put it back together, and then it came back. He came in and
the one just shocking element of this is, and most people don't realize this, the Commerce Department oversees the U.S. Patent Office. So therefore, Wilbur Ross is overseeing the Patent Office, which is now run by Serco, which was created by a Sir Geoffrey Patty colleague and a Sir David, took my glasses off, Sir David Walker colleague called Robin Nicholson, who was also on the board of governors of the IP Institute in London. So why do we see all of these vultures circling around intellectual property in both the UK and the US? Now it gets even more strange. The Intellectual Property Institute in London is now disbanded, and the guy that had been CEO is now the chief advisor to the International Intellectual Property Institute in the US, that is run by the former director of the Patent Office under Bill Clinton, a guy by the name of Bruce Lehman. And so this little cabal of people is completely running all intellectual property issuances in the UK and in the US right now. And involved in this are two people that were founders of Serco, which is now running the US Patent Office. So if that isn't hard evidence, I don't know what is.
Well, the damages to Leader Technologies is what, about $5 trillion if you take the wealth that was created out of IBM Eclipse Foundation, which really was nothing more than sharing your patented ideas to 20 different companies. I didn't name all of them. There's many more: Microsoft, Apple, HP.
Well, that's a rough valuation of the current value of telecommunications and related social networking technologies worldwide.
Mind you, Wilbur Ross went in telecommunications, textiles, steel, coal. Does any of this sound familiar? He is always at the avant-garde, cutting edge of what is failing and is about to turn around. And it so happens that, yes, some of the things Trump is supporting are making him rich. He separated himself from 80 different companies. This man is one of the biggest wheeler and dealers out there. And it isn't surprising that when the Brits stole the patent from you and it was getting ready to burst on the scene, but it took 2 years for you guys to finish it, that's probably when he heard about it, he got in, he got over, bought his way into it, hung out a while, got his piece of the pie, got out. I mean, this is what he does. He gets into these insider trading situations. And if you watch carefully, you'll also see that George Soros is also trying to manipulate some of those same exact industries.
Well, it looks to me now that Soros only copies what these guys do.
Precisely.
They all know how to play the game. They all know how to drive markets up and down and sell and buy.
Wilbur's the big player.
Based on their activities.
Okay, Wilbur's the big player. Trump had to have
him. So that's
him.
obviously the reason they haven't moved against George Soros, because they're all doing the same thing.
Yes, and before Wilbur, the guy in the Economic Council who was the globalist, I mean, he kicked him out. You know, he used the Goldman Sachs people, and then he kicks him out. I don't know that he'll kick Wilbur Ross out. Wilbur Ross is his friend. Wilbur Ross not only helped him in that, he helped him in a few other situations and guided some people towards Jared's venture capital real estate deal in Manhattan, where basically Soros and Rothschild and a bunch of Russian oligarchs all said they would give money for this. They never did put the money up. So what I'm saying is, people are going to say, "Oh, Wilbur Ross, he's evil. He's with Trump. He is one of the biggest evil dealers in the world." Well, yeah, kind of in a way, and that's who you need. That's who you need. You need the people who can talk to a Rothschild on their own level. You need the people who can say, listen, I can pull together the money. I mean, he's only worth supposedly $2.5 billion, and then during his confirmation, they said only, 700,000, 800,000. Took him off the list of billionaires, so on and so forth. Nonsense. The deals that man has done are mega billion deals, okay? So he is as big as it comes in terms of dealers. That's why he got his piece of the pie. And so, in a way, it is shocking to me to find out Wilbur Ross was involved not only perhaps in IP theft, and specifically the Facebook IP theft of Leader Technologies patents, but also steel, aluminum.
Well, so if he was the one that sent in to protect Serco's holding over the contract over the U.S. Patent Office, then he will know the details on how to unwind that.
That is exactly why we say Trump brings these people in, he has them teach him the evil ways, and then he can work with it. But you cannot fight evil if you do not know its path. if you don't know the way that machine works, and nobody could know it better, both in America and in Britain, than Wilbur Ross. So I'm actually thrilled because nobody's going to do anything Trump isn't going to let them do, and if they do, he'll just fire them. So what is
Right.
Trump after? He's after fulfilling his promises to us, and that's happening. Is he working with Russians? No one in any business in America on a large scale wasn't working with Russians. That's just plain naive. Were the Brits really working against us? Yes, they're not our friends. Was Wilbur Ross working with the Brits against us? I think he was working for his own economic gain, to be quite frank with you, because I don't see his footprints anywhere in the election meddling, though I'm sure he has to be quite aware of it. He's sitting at the table with the biggest propagandist in the world, Sir Geoffrey Patty and SCL, and I'm sure he worked with the Mercers. I'm sure he's worked with all these groups. Reuters. I mean, he worked for Reuters. David A. Walker worked for Reuters, for heaven's sakes, in their investment group.
Yes, he did.
For heaven's sakes,
Reuters Investments.
as you have pointed
Reuters
out,
Holdings.
small group of people. It's really not going to take a lot to take them out, as long as we can shine a spotlight on their dark evil.
Well, the records are there, and the proof is there. That means there's proof. We're not speculating. None of this that we just talked about, it has an ounce of speculation in it. Now, I will say that in the records I've reviewed so far, he bought the company and then they shut it down. What we don't know is the behind-the-scenes story of that, but I will point out that during this entire pre-Facebook IPO, post-Facebook IPO mechanism, up till the time Wilbur Ross came on, HSBC was the banker of this NBNK, and Ross fired them as banker and brought in somebody else.
Well, what's very clear, as you point out often, is in Britain they don't have a constitution. We do. We have a U.S. Bill of Rights also. So when you go to be one of the Queen's men, really you're working in a system where your loyalty is to the monarchy, not to we the people, not to the British people,
right.
Not to United Kingdom, not to the Commonwealth, not to any of them, and certainly not to America, who, as far as I'm concerned, they are still conducting a revolution. We need to conduct a revolution to get away from Britain, because they have infiltrated our central banking system, our banking systems. All those companies, those investment companies, those are the ones always involved with all the military-industrial complex groups. Right. And again, you mentioned Serco. Serco comes up all the time because they control Lockheed Martin, our second largest military contractor.
Just to realize the depth to which Serco has already infiltrated our infrastructure is just appalling. And when now we can see the clear evidence that these same individuals, these knighted individuals, these Privy Council players, are all on both sides of the Atlantic involved in these deals. We are in peril. And we might as well start flying our flag upside down permanently now, because until companies like Serco are defunded and sent packing, we are in peril. That's my opinion.
Yes, I totally agree, and I think that an article I read recently basically says we got to get the Brits out of our business, period. Done. That's it. Search them out. Find out the companies they own that they're hiding under, the invisible companies, these shill companies, these companies that say they're American because they have an office here, but the money goes straight to Britain. No. They all have to be searched out, whether it's in Crown agents or whether it's the money flowing from the USAID to Britain, whether it's the Millennium Corporation money, whether it's aid, whether it's the Five Eye Agreement where we actually, through NATO, give money to the Brits and the rest of your European Union. We have to back out of all of that, just as Trump is doing. We have to back out, continue to back out, as he's doing, of the United Nations, because those international organizations do not have we the people, Americans, at their heart. So I'm not really in a war with the Brits, not at all. I am in a war with monarchy, and I'm in a war with any type of government that is going to serve an imaginary lineage of people who believe they have a divine right of kings that connects them to the divine. That is not true. And whether they call them a dictator in North Korea, or whether they call them, the supreme emperor, I'm not going to get into other countries, but there are countries that believe that their ruler lives on the sun. that they are a being of the sun and that they are divine. Okay? Get over it, people. These are humans.
Well, this is why we had a revolution, and none of this is new, because the Brits were doing this long before 1776. So this is the exact kind of conduct that our founders said we've had enough of, and they wrote a constitution and a Bill of Rights to stop it. Unfortunately, the will wasn't there among the citizens that followed to completely prevent this stuff from creeping back in, and it obviously has.
Well,
and that's what we've got to deal with.
That's right. The way I see it is real simple. The central bank in England was created from, first off, a German central bank idea. But what really happened was the British East India Company and the Dutch East India Company and the German traders had become such a powerful force on the sea with their navy that the British had to borrow money so that they could build up their navy, so that their power of the monarchy could overrule the power of these corporations. The British East India Company, Dutch East India Company were corporations. And so what they did is they subsumed those corporations as a military economic force underneath the monarchy, which then became her Privy Council. And the Privy Council controls the Parliament. People don't understand. The Parliament, the Queen can veto anything. So the Parliament it's for show, folks. It's not real. And the monarchy is still very, very powerful in the United Kingdom. And it subsumed the corporations. And now the evil of the lie of monarchical superiority and corporate superiority over we the people is exemplified in the British system, in the City of London and the monarchy, but it has bled over here into America through Serco, through the senior executive services as its basically its own Privy Council, its own secret government that makes sure that everything always stays the way that it should.
Its own remuneration committee, the Council of 500 in the Department of Justice.
Exactly.
Yeah, we've created a shadow of what they do in Britain, but I think all those folks are jealous of the royalty because they do it so much better. And so that's what happens when you have huge egos. You get real jealous of other people that have got more than you.
Look, Robert Mueller gave Comey immunity, and he acts with impunity, but he does not have divine impunity like the Crown. Divine impunity. You can't ask a question. You can't prosecute her. You can't ask about her money. You can't ask anything about the Bank of England because it might reveal the
Douglas,
Queen.
Nobody thinks of the Queen that way, in my experience. They don't think about those divine right issues. I understand what you're saying historically, but she's just like their mom. I mean, she's got an excellent PR.
Oh yeah.
Overall, and it's so ingrained in the Brits to be loyal to the Queen. It's like being loyal to the flag over here.
I know.
So it's the theory of why the power is what it is one thing. The people don't really think about it that deeply, but I think we have to in order to unwind this.
Well, they should think about the fact that the wealth of England goes out through the monarchy and goes into offshore accounts. This is very well known.
Right.
And that the Bank of England is as crooked as one of the Queen's horses. And all
we're talking about Sir David Walker, who ran the Bank of England. He was their chief intelligence officer.
Exactly. So
we're talking to the Queen's banker here.
This
about the Queen's banker.
Economic warfare.
Right.
Plain and simple.
And that's who Wilbur Ross did his deal with. So Wilbur certainly knows the players.
So there it was, the big drop. Wilbur Ross is one of the Queen's men. Unbelievable. He also helped the Bank of Ireland out of trouble. He helped the British so much that they've given him award after award. And so we just want to say that when it comes up again that Trump has hired a globalist, yes, he has, and he's basically letting that globalist school him in the pathways of evil that go to places that many of us Americans never would have realized that the first American Revolution was never won. Michael, thank you for your help today in solving some of these problems.
You're welcome. It's always good to talk with you.
And to filter through all of this so that you can make some sense of it, because what you reveal all the time is the indictable evidence, but once you frame it, then it becomes the real news of the day. This is the most breaking news that I can imagine. So thank you again for your amazing research.
You're welcome.